Three armed men cornered her in the dusty general store, their revolvers gleaming in the afternoon heat. Evelyn Crow's heart hammered as the gang leader stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "You got 48 hours to clear out, girl, or we'll drag you off that ranch ourselves." Her fingers trembled against the flour sacks. No law in Black Hollow would save her. Victor Granger owned everyone. Then the door creaked open. A stranger stepped through the sunlight, his gray eyes colder than winter stone. "She's leaving here with me." And everything changed. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The heat in Black Hollow didn't just beat down, it punished. It cracked the earth into jagged patterns that looked like broken glass, turned water troughs into mud, and made every breath feel like swallowing sand. By July of 1887, the drought had stretched into its third summer, and the town looked like something dying slow. Evelyn Crow knew that feeling better than most. She sat on the wagon seat outside Miller's general store, watching dust devils spin across Main Street while her horse stood with its head hanging low. 23 years old, and she felt twice that. Her father's Stetson, too big for her head, cast a shadow across sunburned cheeks and eyes that hadn't slept right in months. The hat was one of three things he'd left her. The other two were a dying ranch and enough debt to bury her alongside him. "Just get the supplies and go," she muttered to herself, wiping sweat from her neck. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't look at anyone. Get out." But the moment she stepped through the store's door, she knew something was wrong. The usual afternoon crowd, ranchers arguing about cattle prices, farmers buying seed they couldn't afford, women examining fabric they'd never purchase, all of them had gone silent. Every face turned toward the back corner where three men stood near the pickle barrels, and every expression carried the same message: get out while you can. Evelyn recognized them immediately. Granger's men. The tall one with the scar through his eyebrow was called Dutch. The stocky one picking his teeth with a knife was Clem. The third, the one with dead eyes and a silver tooth that caught the light, was Ray Carver, Granger's enforcer, the man who did the talking before the killing started. They'd been waiting for her. "Miss Crow," Ray said, his voice carrying across the silent store like a rattlesnake's warning. "Ain't seen you in town for a while." Evelyn's throat went dry, but she kept walking toward the counter where Mr. Miller stood frozen behind the register, his weathered face pale. "Just here for supplies." "That's so." Ray pushed off from the barrel and started toward her, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Dutch and Clem fanned out, blocking the aisle. "Funny thing about supplies, they cost money, and money's something you ain't got much of anymore." She reached the counter and pulled out her shopping list with fingers that wanted to shake but wouldn't, not in front of them. "Mr. Miller knows I'm good for it." "Actually," Miller said quietly, not meeting her eyes, "I've been meaning to talk to you about your account, Evelyn. It's gotten pretty high, and with your father gone, I'll pay you by harvest," she cut in, hating the desperation creeping into her voice. "The cattle?" "You got 12 head left," Ray interrupted, stepping closer. "Saw them myself last week. Skinny things barely worth the powder to shoot them." "That ain't a ranch, sweetheart. That's a graveyard with fences." The other customers had started drifting toward the door, one by one, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Within seconds, the store had emptied except for Miller, the three gunmen, and Evelyn. She forced herself to turn and face Ray directly. "What do you want?" His smile showed that silver tooth. "Mr. Granger wants to make you an offer, a generous one considering. $500 for your land, water rights included. You sign the deed today, money's in your hand by tomorrow. The ranch is worth 10 times that." "Was worth 10 times that," Ray corrected. "Before the drought killed your herd, before your father drank himself to death worrying about it, before you ran every hired hand off with that sharp tongue of yours." He took another step. "Now it ain't worth the dirt it's sitting on. Except to Mr. Granger. He's willing to take it off your hands as a courtesy." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. "Tell Granger he can take his courtesy and—" "Careful," Dutch warned from behind her, his voice low and mean. "You're outnumbered, girl." "This is theft," she said, louder than she intended. "Everyone knows it. The sheriff—" Ray laughed, and it sounded like gravel scraping over bone. "The sheriff works for Mr. Granger, same as half this town. You think anyone's going to help you?" Your daddy had friends once, sure, but they're all dead, broke, or smart enough to keep their mouths shut. He moved close enough that she could smell tobacco and old sweat. You got two choices: sell now and walk away with something, or we take it anyway and you leave with nothing, maybe not even your teeth. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Behind the counter, Miller looked at his shoes. You got 48 hours, Ray continued. Come Monday, we're moving you off that land one way or another, and trust me, sweetheart, you don't want to see what another looks like. Evelyn's heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she thought they could hear it. 3 armed men. No witnesses willing to talk. No law that would stand up to Granger's money. She'd known this was coming for months, but knowing didn't make it easier when the boot was finally on your neck. She opened her mouth to tell them to go to hell. The door creaked open. Sunlight poured through the doorway like something liquid and heavy. And for a moment, all Evelyn could see was a silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, a duster coat hanging to his knees, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. The stranger stepped inside and let the door swing shut behind him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was maybe 30 years old, hard to tell exactly. Dust covered his clothes like he'd ridden through every desert between here and California. A week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, but it was his eyes that made Evelyn's breath catch, gray as winter clouds and just as cold. They swept across the store, taking in the 3 gunmen, Miller's terrified face, and Evelyn trapped between the shelves, and they didn't show a flicker of emotion. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried like distant thunder. Store open for business? Ray turned, annoyed at the interruption. We're having a private conversation here, friend. Come back later. The stranger ignored him completely. He walked toward the counter, his spurs making the only sound in that suffocating silence, and when he passed Evelyn, their eyes met for half a second. Something in that glance made her spine straighten. Not fear, not quite, but recognition. Like looking at a blade and knowing exactly how sharp it was. I need ammunition, the stranger said to Miller. 44 caliber. Box of 50. I said, Ray stepped forward, his hand dropping toward his revolver. We're busy. The stranger stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face Ray Carver and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who'd seen this dance before and knew exactly how it ended. You're Granger's men, he said. Not a question. Ray's eyes narrowed. That's right. You know Mr. Granger? I know what he does. I know how men like you operate. The stranger's hand hung loose near his own gun, and Evelyn noticed for the first time the worn leather holster, the way the revolver sat positioned just right for a fast draw. I know you're in here scaring a woman half your size because your boss is too much of a coward to do his own dirty work. Dutch and Clem both went stiff. Ray's face flushed dark red. You got a death wish, mister? Not particularly. The stranger tilted his head slightly. But I'm curious. How fast are you? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her ears. She could see the calculation happening in Ray's eyes. 3 of them, one of him, they had the numbers. But there was something about the way this stranger stood, balanced, relaxed, like violence was just another Tuesday, that made even Ray hesitate. This ain't your fight, Ray said finally. Wasn't planning on making it one. The stranger glanced at Evelyn again, then back at Ray. But the lady looks like she's trying to leave, and you're in her way, so here's what's going to happen. He took a single step forward. She's leaving here with me, right now, and if you got a problem with that, we can settle it however you want. The silence that followed was so complete, Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. Ray's hand twitched toward his gun and froze. Because the stranger's revolver was already out, held low but steady, hammer-cocked, barrel pointed at Ray's chest. Evelyn hadn't even seen him draw. One moment his hand was empty, the next it wasn't. Like I said, the stranger repeated softly. She's leaving with me. Clem started to move, reaching for his weapon, but the stranger's gun shifted toward him without the man even seeming to look. Don't! Clem froze. Dutch took a slow step backward, his hands rising carefully away from his sides. Ray's face had gone from red to pale. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He'd made his reputation with fear and numbers and hitting people who couldn't hit back. He'd never been on the other side of someone faster. You just made a real bad mistake, Ray finally managed. Probably. The stranger gestured toward the door with his gun. But I'll worry about that tomorrow. Right now, the lady needs to go. Evelyn didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her shopping list off the counter, pointless now, but her hands needed something to hold, and started toward the door. Her legs felt shaky, her mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. The stranger backed toward the exit, his gun never wavering, his eyes locked on Ray and the others. "Tell Granger," he said as Evelyn reached the door, "that the Crow Ranch is off limits. Anyone rides out there looking for trouble, they'll find it. Clear enough?" Ray's silver tooth flashed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Sure I do." The stranger's smile came back, sharp and cold. "I've been dealing with him for 6 years." Then he was through the door, holstering his weapon in one smooth motion and grabbing Evelyn's arm to guide her toward her wagon. Behind them, through the store window, she could see Ray shouting something at Dutch and Clem, his face twisted with rage. "Get on the wagon," the stranger said. "We need to move." Evelyn climbed up, her hand shaking so bad she almost dropped the reins. "Who are you?" He was already swinging up onto a big roan horse tied nearby, an animal that looked as trail-worn as its rider. "Name's Silas Kane, and you're Evelyn Crow. How did you... Heard about your situation." He wheeled the horse around. "Now ride, fast as you can. Don't stop until you're home." "Wait, you can't just..." But he was already spurring his horse forward, not running but moving with purpose, and Evelyn found herself snapping the reins and following. Behind them, she heard the store door bang open, heard Ray Carver shouting something about getting the horses, but by then they were already moving down Main Street, dust rising in their wake. The few people on the street scattered like startled chickens. Evelyn caught glimpses of shocked faces, pointing fingers, but she didn't slow down. Silas Kane rode slightly ahead, his eyes scanning the buildings, the alleys, the rooftops, looking for threats the way a wolf watches for rivals. They cleared the edge of town and hit the open trail before anyone came after them. The afternoon sun beat down merciless and bright, turning the landscape into something that shimmered and wavered like a fever dream. After 10 minutes of hard riding, Silas slowed his horse to a walk. Evelyn pulled up alongside him, her hat blown back, her face flushed from heat and adrenaline. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. "That was me saving your life." "I didn't ask you to, You didn't have to." He looked at her directly for the first time, and up close, those gray eyes were even colder than she'd thought. But there was something else there too. Pain, maybe. Old anger that had burned so long it had turned to ice. "You know who Victor Granger is?" "Everyone knows Granger. Biggest rancher in 3 territories, owns half the land between here and Denver." "He owns it because he stole it," Silas said flatly. "Bought off sheriffs, burned out families, killed anyone who stood in his way. Been doing it for 20 years. Evelyn studied him. "And how do you know that?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, controlled, like a man holding something sharp that might cut him if he wasn't careful. "Because 15 years ago, my family owned a ranch up north. Good water, decent land. Granger wanted it. My father refused to sell." He paused. "Granger's men came in the night, burned the house. My parents died in the fire. My little sister, she was 8. She died trying to get out." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Why would you?" Silas's jaw tightened. "I was 14, hiding in the barn, heard them screaming and couldn't do a damn thing about it. By the time I got to the house, it was too late. All I could do was watch it burn." The desert stretched around them, endless and indifferent. "I've spent the last 15 years tracking Granger," Silas continued, "following the trail of families he's destroyed, ranches he's stolen, people who've disappeared after refusing his generous offers. Thought I'd lost him in Colorado, then heard he'd moved his operation down here to New Mexico territory." "So you came looking for him?" "Been looking for him every day since I was old enough to hold a gun." Silas glanced at her. "Then 3 days ago, I heard about a young woman trying to hold on to her father's ranch against Granger's whole organization. Heard she was too stubborn to sell and too broke to hire protection. Figured that made you next on his list." Evelyn's throat felt tight. "You came all this way for a stranger?" "I came because Granger needs to be stopped, and because I know how this ends if someone doesn't step in." His voice dropped lower. "I've seen too many graves already. Wasn't planning on seeing another one with your name on it." They rode in silence for a while. Evelyn's mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had just happened. An hour ago, she'd been alone against impossible odds. Now she had a stranger riding beside her, a stranger with his own demons and a vendetta older than she was. "They'll come after you now," she said finally. "Granger doesn't let things like that slide." "I'm counting on it." "That's insane." "Probably." Silas almost smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But I've been called worse." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." "I can't even feed you properly. The ranch. There's barely anything left. 12 cattle, a windmill that doesn't work, fences that are falling apart. I'm not worth dying for." Silas reined his horse to a stop and turned to face her fully. The sun was behind him, casting his face in shadow, but his eyes caught the light. "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "Your father built that ranch with his own hands. You fought for a year to keep it alive against drought, debt, and men with guns. That kind of courage is exactly worth fighting for." He paused. "And maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I want to make a stand somewhere that matters." Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since her father's funeral. She'd been so alone for so long, carrying weight that would have crushed most people twice her size. And now here was this dangerous, damaged man offering to help carry it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you really care?" Silas looked away, his jaw working. "Because if I'd been braver at 14, maybe my family would still be alive. Maybe I could have done something, stopped them somehow." His hands tightened on the reins. "I can't fix the past, but I can damn sure try to stop it from happening again." The weight of that confession settled between them like something physical. "What's your plan?" Evelyn asked. "Don't have one yet, but I know Granger. He'll send more men, probably tonight. We need to be ready." "Ready how? It's just us against a lot, yeah. But we've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" Silas's smile came back, sharp and grim. "Nothing left to lose." They reached the Crow Ranch as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. The place looked exactly how Evelyn had described it, dying but not dead yet. The main house was solid enough, built from adobe and timber by someone who knew what they were doing, but the paint was peeling and several shutters hung crooked. The barn leaned slightly to one side like a drunk trying to stay upright. Fences sagged in places where posts had rotted through. The windmill stood frozen, its blades motionless in air that should have been moving them. But beneath the decay, Evelyn could see the bones of something good. Her father had chosen this spot well, high enough to catch any breeze, close enough to a creek bed that might run again if the rains ever came back. The land had potential. It just needed someone who believed in it. Silas dismounted and stood for a long moment, studying the ranch with an expert's eye. Evelyn watched him take it all in, the defensive positions, the sight lines, the approaches an enemy might use. "They'll come from the east," he said finally. "Follow the creek bed for cover, then spread out when they get close." "How do you know?" "Because that's what I'd do." He led his horse toward the barn. "How much ammunition you got?" "My father's rifle, maybe 20 rounds. "That'll have to do for now. What about food? Water?" "Enough for a few days if we're careful." Silas nodded, still scanning the property. "We'll need to set up watches. I'll take first night. You get some sleep. This is my ranch. I'll pull my own weight." He looked at her, and something like respect flickered across his face. "Never doubted it. But you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. You've been carrying this place alone for months. Let me help." Evelyn wanted to argue, but exhaustion was already pulling at her bones. She hadn't slept a full night since her father died. Every creak of the house, every coyote howl, every whisper of wind had her awake and reaching for the rifle. "Fine," she said. "But tomorrow, we work together. Fix what we can. Make this place defensible." "Deal." She showed him where to stable his horse, then led him into the house. The interior was sparse but clean. Evelyn hadn't let everything fall apart. Her father's rifle hung over the fireplace. A table and 2 chairs occupied the kitchen. Upstairs were 2 small bedrooms, one of which she'd closed off after her father passed. "You can sleep in my father's room," she said, her voice catching slightly on the words. "I'll stay down here. Rather be close to the door." She didn't argue. Part of her was relieved. Having him upstairs felt too intimate, too much like accepting that her life had changed completely in the span of a single afternoon. "There's beans in the pantry," she said. "Coffee if you want it." "I'm good." Silas set his saddlebags down and began checking his weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He had 2 revolvers, a rifle, and a knife that looked sharp enough to split hairs. "You should eat something, though. Going to need your strength." Evelyn realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. She heated up beans on the stove while Silas moved around the house, checking windows, testing doors, making note of every weak point and defensive position. "This is a good house," he said eventually. "Solid construction. Once we board up a few windows, reinforce the doors, it'll hold against most anything short of artillery." "You really think they'll come tonight?" "Ray Carver doesn't strike me as the patient type. And after what happened in town, he'll want to prove something. Show Granger he's still in control." Silas paused at the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "But maybe not tonight. Maybe he'll wait, let you sweat for a day or two. Either way, we prepare." They ate in silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons on tin plates and the wind starting to pick up outside. Evelyn studied Silas when he wasn't looking, the scars on his knuckles, the way he sat with his back to the wall, the slight limp when he walked that suggested an old injury. He was a man built by violence and loss, held together by purpose that had probably stopped making sense years ago. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Depends on the question. In town, when you drew your gun, I've never seen anyone that fast. Where'd you learn that?" Silas didn't answer right away. He pushed his empty plate aside and stared at the table like he could see ghosts in the grain. "After my family died, I had nothing. No money, no home, no skills worth a damn. I was angry and stupid and looking for ways to get myself killed without pulling the trigger myself." He exhaled slowly. "Fell in with some rough people for a while. Outlaws, gunslingers, men who lived by the draw and died the same way. They taught me things. How to shoot. How to fight. How to survive when everyone wants you dead. Were you one of them? An outlaw? For a time." His eyes met hers, unflinching. "I'm not proud of it. Did things I can't take back. But it kept me alive long enough to realize that dying wasn't what I wanted. Revenge was." Evelyn absorbed this. "And now? After all these years, do you still want it?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I did. Thought nothing would satisfy me except seeing Granger dead and buried. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about revenge and started being about stopping him from doing to others what he did to me." He looked at her. "Your father, how'd he die?" The question caught her off guard. "He was sick. His heart," the doctor said. "But I think it was really the worry that killed him. Watching the ranch fail, the cattle die, the debt pile up. He kept trying to fix it, kept pushing himself harder, and one morning he just..." Her voice broke. "He didn't wake up." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything." "No," Silas agreed. "It doesn't." More silence. Outside, the wind was picking up stronger now, rattling the shutters. "You should get some sleep," Silas said. "I'll keep watch." Evelyn wanted to protest, but exhaustion was winning. She climbed the stairs to her room, still fully dressed, and lay down on the bed without even pulling back the covers. Sleep came fast and hard, dragging her under like dark water. She woke to the sound of breaking glass. Evelyn sat bolt upright, heart hammering, momentarily disoriented. The room was pitch black. How long had she slept? An hour? 3? Another crash, this time from downstairs. Then Silas's voice, sharp and commanding. "Get down here, now!" She grabbed her father's rifle and took the stairs 2 at a time. The main room was chaos. One window shattered, another cracked, and through the broken glass she could see shapes moving in the darkness outside. Silas was crouched by the front window, his revolver already drawn. "How many?" Evelyn asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "At least 6. Maybe more." A voice called out from the darkness, slurred and mean. "Clem. We know you're in there, Crow. Come out peaceful and we'll make this quick." Evelyn moved to the opposite window, trying to see through the gloom. The moon was hidden behind clouds, making the night a wall of black. "They're testing us," Silas said quietly, "seeing if we'll run or fight." A bottle arced through the broken window, trailing flame. A Molotov cocktail. Silas shot it midair and it exploded in a shower of burning kerosene that splashed across the porch but didn't catch. That your answer? Ray Carver's voice now coming from somewhere near the barn. Fine, we'll burn you out. Gunfire erupted. Bullets punched through windows, splintered the door frame, tore chunks out of the adobe walls. Evelyn dropped below the window ledge, her ears ringing from the noise. Silas returned fire, measured and precise. Each shot counted. She heard someone scream. He'd hit one. The barn! Evelyn shouted. They're going for the barn! She could see the flicker of torches now, figures running through the darkness. If they burned the barn, the fire would spread. The house would be next. Cover me! Silas was up and moving before she could stop him, out the door and into the night. She saw him sprint across the yard, a shadow among shadows, and then he disappeared. Evelyn fired through the window, not sure if she hit anything but needing to keep them distracted. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. Muzzle flash lit up faces in the darkness. Dutch, Clem, men she didn't recognize, more than 6, maybe 10. They were going to die here. The thought came clear and cold. 10 armed men against 2 people. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Then lightning split the sky, and for one frozen moment Evelyn saw everything. Silas at the barn, grappling with someone twice his size. Ray Carver taking aim at Silas's back. Dutch and 2 others rushing the house. Thunder rolled across the desert, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Rain. After 3 years of drought, rain. Evelyn shot at Dutch, missed, fired again. The men scattered, looking for cover. The rain was coming harder now, turning from drops to sheets, and suddenly those torches were sputtering and dying. Silas appeared at the door, dragging someone, the man he'd fought. He threw the unconscious body onto the porch and slammed the door behind him. They're pulling back, Evelyn shouted over the storm. She was right. Through the rain, she could see figures retreating, horses being mounted. The sudden storm had broken their attack, but as lightning flashed again, she saw Silas slumped against the wall, his hand pressed to his side. Dark blood seeped between his fingers. You're shot, she said, moving toward him. Just a graze. But his face was pale, his breathing labored. That's not a graze. She grabbed his arm and helped him toward the table. Outside, the rain pounded down like something biblical, extinguishing any remaining flames and turning the yard into mud. The attackers were gone. For now. Evelyn lit a lamp with shaking hands and made Silas sit. When she pulled his hand away from the wound, she saw the bullet had torn through his side just above the hip. Not fatal, but bad enough. I need to clean it, she said. No time. They'll regroup. Ukuk. Shut up and let me help you. Her voice came out fiercer than she intended. You rode in here to save my life. Least I can do is return the favor. Silas looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. She worked quickly, tearing strips of cloth for bandages, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him hiss between clenched teeth. The bullet had gone straight through, lucky in its way. She packed the wound and wrapped it tight while the storm raged outside. Thank you, Silas said quietly when she finished. Evelyn sat back, her hands bloody, her whole body shaking from adrenaline and fear. They'll come back. Probably not tonight, not in this rain. He gestured toward the unconscious man on the porch. But we got ourselves a prisoner. Might be able to learn something. She looked at the man lying in the rain, young, maybe 20, with a mean face and cheap clothes. One of Granger's hired guns, expendable. This is what my life is now, Evelyn said, more to herself than to Silas. Gunfights and blood and waiting for the next attack. Could still sell, Silas offered, though his tone suggested he knew better. Take Granger's money and disappear. Start over somewhere else. And let him win? Let him take everything my father built? She shook her head. I'd rather die. Might come to that. I know. She looked at him, this dangerous stranger who'd crashed into her life like a meteor. But if I'm going down, at least I won't go down alone. Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. They were both people who'd lost everything and refused to stop fighting even when fighting made no sense. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing blood from the porch and filling dry creek beds that hadn't run in years. And in the darkness beyond the ranch, Victor Granger's men regrouped and planned their next move. The war had just begun. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the desert smelling like wet earth and possibility. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the sun break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene after the violence of the night before. Her father's rifle rested against her shoulder, her eyes scanning the empty landscape for movement. Behind her, through the open door, she could hear Silas moving around despite his injury. The man didn't know how to stay still. "You should be resting," she called without turning around. "Already rested." His voice was tight with pain he was trying to hide. "We got work to do." She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his shirt off, fresh bandages wrapped around his torso. The wound had bled through during the night, staining the cloth dark red. His face was pale, but determined. "You're in no condition to—" "I'm in perfect condition to not get shot again because we left ourselves exposed." He gestured toward the yard. "That windmill needs fixing. The fence line's got holes big enough to drive cattle through. And we need to figure out what to do with our guest." The prisoner. Evelyn had almost forgotten about him. She'd dragged him into the barn after the attack, tied him to a post, and left him there to soak in the rain until morning. "He say anything yet?" "Haven't asked." Silas pulled his shirt back on, wincing as the fabric touched the bandage. "Figured we'd have that conversation together." They found the young gunman exactly where they'd left him, soaked and shivering despite the growing heat. His name, he told them after Silas pressed a knife to his throat, was Billy Hutchins. He was 19 years old and had been working for Granger for 6 months. "I didn't know they was going to burn nothing," Billy said, his voice cracking. "Ray just said we was going to scare you off. Make some noise. I swear I didn't shoot nobody." "You threw a torch at my barn," Evelyn said coldly. "That was Clem. I was just holding the horses." Silas studied the kid with eyes that had seen too many Billy Hutchins in too many towns. Young, stupid, desperate for money and meaning, willing to do terrible things for men who wouldn't remember their names after they died. "How many more are coming?" Silas asked. "I don't know. Dozen? Maybe?" Ray was real mad after last night. Said he was going to bring everyone. "When?" "Tonight, maybe tomorrow. He's got to talk to Mr. Granger first, get permission for—" Billy stopped, realizing he'd said too much. "Permission for what?" Silas leaned in close. "What's Granger planning?" Billy's eyes darted between them like a trapped animal. "I ain't supposed to say. Ray'll kill me if he—" "Ray's not here." Silas's voice dropped to something cold and final. "And you got 2 choices. Tell us what we need to know and walk out of here alive, or keep your mouth shut and we leave you for the coyotes. Your call." The kid broke. "Mr. Granger's done playing around. He wants the ranch, and he wants you both dead. Ray's supposed to make it look like an accident, fire maybe, or a stampede, something that won't bring federal attention." Evelyn felt ice in her stomach. "Federal attention? There's been talk. Some ranchers up north complained to the territorial governor about Granger's business practices. Nothing came of it, but Mr. Granger's been careful ever since. Can't just murder people in broad daylight no more." Silas and Evelyn exchanged glances. This was information worth having. "What else?" Silas pressed. "That's all I know, I swear. I'm just hired muscle. They don't tell me nothing important." Silas straightened, sliding the knife back into his belt. "All right, Billy, here's how this works. You're going to walk out of here, get on your horse, and ride as far from Black Hollow as that animal can carry you. You're going to forget you ever worked for Victor Granger, and you're going to find yourself an honest job somewhere. You understand?" Billy nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I won't—" "I'm not done." Silas's voice went hard again. "If I ever see your face again, if I even hear your name in the wrong context, I will hunt you down and finish what we started last night. You get 1 chance to walk away. Don't waste it." They cut him loose and watched him stumble toward his horse, mount up with shaking hands, and ride east without looking back. Evelyn waited until he disappeared over the ridge before speaking. "You think he'll actually leave?" "Probably. Kid's scared enough." Silas turned toward the house. "But it doesn't matter. We got bigger problems." He was right. The attack last night had been a warning shot. The next one would be worse. They spent the morning fortifying what they could. Silas climbed the windmill despite Evelyn's protests, his injured side making every movement a test of will, and managed to get the blades turning again. The creak and groan of metal echoed across the ranch like something waking from a long sleep. Water began flowing into the trough for the first time in months. "How'd you know how to fix that?" Evelyn asked when he climbed down. "My father taught me before—" He stopped, his jaw tight. "Before everything." She didn't push. Some wounds were too deep to touch. They moved on to the fences, replacing rotted posts with fresh-cut timber from the woodpile her father had left behind. The work was hard and hot, made worse by Silas's injury, but he refused to stop. Evelyn watched him work with a strange mix of frustration and admiration. The man was half dead and still moving like stopping would kill him faster. "You're going to tear those stitches," she said as he hammered a post into the hard ground. "Then you'll sew them up again." "I'm not a doctor." "Could have fooled me." He paused, wiping sweat from his face. "You did good last night. A lot of people would have frozen up. A lot of people haven't spent the last year fighting to survive." Evelyn grabbed another post and positioned it. "You learn fast when your choices are fight or die." "Yeah." Something in his voice made her look up. He was staring at the horizon, his eyes distant. "Yeah, you do." They worked in silence after that, the only sounds the ring of hammer on wood and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. By noon, they'd repaired enough fence to keep the cattle from wandering, though with only 12 head left, it barely seemed worth the effort. "What are you going to do?" Silas asked as they rested in the shade of the barn. "After this is over, I mean, assuming we survive." Evelyn hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Survival was measured in hours now, not months or years. "Rebuild, I guess. If there's anything left to rebuild. You ever think about doing something else? Leaving ranching behind?" "Every single day," she laughed, but it came out bitter. "But this is all I know. All I've ever known. My father spent his whole life building this place. Feels wrong to just abandon it. Even if it kills you? Even then." Silas nodded slowly, like he understood something she hadn't said out loud. "My father was the same way. Stubborn as hell, wouldn't quit even when quitting made sense. Used to drive my mother crazy." His voice softened. "But I respected it. That kind of determination. It means something. Didn't save him, though." "No, it didn't." The afternoon heat pressed down on them like a physical weight. Evelyn watched a dust devil spin across the yard, scattering hay and debris. Everything felt balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move and it would all come crashing down. "Tell me about them," she said suddenly. "Your family, if you want to." Silas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice careful, like handling glass. "My father's name was William. He was a blacksmith before he bought the ranch. Strong as an ox, hands like iron. He could shoe a horse faster than anyone I've ever seen." A faint smile touched his lips. "My mother, Caroline, she was educated, taught school before they married. She made sure my sister and I could read and write, do our numbers, said ignorance was a worse prison than poverty." "And your sister?" The smile vanished. "Emma. She loved horses, used to spend hours in the barn just talking to them, said they understood her better than people did." His hands clenched into fists. "She was sleeping when the fire started. Smoke got her before the flames did. They said," his voice cracked, "they said it was fast, that she didn't suffer. But I heard her screaming, so I know that's a lie people tell to make themselves feel better." Evelyn's chest ached. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "No, it's—" He exhaled slowly. "It's fine. Been carrying it alone for 15 years. Maybe it's time to let someone else see what it looks like." The wind shifted, bringing the smell of rain-soaked earth. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, promising another storm. "What happened after?" Evelyn asked. "After you lost them?" "Bounced around. Odd jobs mostly. Worked on ranches and mines, anywhere that would take a kid with no references and a chip on his shoulder." He stared at his scarred knuckles. "Got into fights, a lot of fights. I was angry all the time, looking for someone to hurt the way I was hurting. Nearly got myself killed a dozen times before I wised up." "What changed?" "Met an old gunfighter named Jack Reese. He was washed up, drinking himself to death in some Colorado saloon. I picked a fight with him one night, and instead of shooting me like I deserved, he knocked me flat and offered to teach me how to actually use a gun." Silas's expression darkened. "Spent 2 years learning from him. By the time he died, liver finally gave out. I could outdraw anyone I met." "And that's when you started hunting Granger?" "That's when I stopped being a stupid kid with a grudge and became something more dangerous." He looked at her directly. "I've killed men, Evelyn. Not just in self-defense. I tracked down 3 of the men who worked for Granger the night my family died, and I put bullets in them. Did it cold, calculated, no fair fight, no warning, just execution. She should have been horrified. Instead, all she felt was a strange understanding. Do you regret it? No, they deserved worse than they got. His jaw tightened, but it didn't make me feel better. Didn't bring my family back, just made me realize revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Then why keep going? Why chase Granger if it won't fix anything? Because someone has to stop him. Silas's voice turned hard as stone. And if it can't be about saving what I lost, at least it can be about saving what's left. The afternoon stretched long and hot. They finished the fence work and moved on to boarding up windows, reinforcing doors, preparing the house to withstand another assault. Every hammer blow, every nail driven home felt like defiance against the inevitable. As the sun started its descent, Evelyn noticed something on the horizon, dust rising in the distance. Riders. Silas, she pointed. He was beside her in seconds, his hand dropping to his gun. They watched the dust cloud grow closer, resolving into shapes. 3 riders, maybe 4. Ray coming back already? Evelyn's pulse quickened. No, these are coming from the wrong direction. Silas squinted against the glare. And they're riding slow, not hostile. As the riders drew closer, Evelyn recognized the lead horse. It belonged to Thomas Miller, the general store owner. Behind him rode 2 more men, ranchers from neighboring properties that Granger hadn't swallowed yet. Hold your fire, Silas said quietly. Let's see what they want. Miller pulled up 20 yards from the house, his hands clearly visible. The older man looked exhausted, his face lined with guilt. Miss Crow? He called out. We come in peace, just want to talk. Evelyn stepped forward, rifle still in hand. Little late for talking, Mr. Miller. You didn't seem interested in peace yesterday when Granger's men had me cornered in your store. Miller flinched. I know. I'm ashamed of that. We all are. He gestured to the men behind him. That's why we're here. One of the other riders, a grizzled rancher named Samuel Chen, spoke up. We heard about the attack last night. Whole town's talking about it. About how you fought back, how that stranger stood up to Ray Carver. He looked at Silas with respect and curiosity. We came to see if the rumors were true. What rumors? Evelyn asked. That someone finally had the guts to tell Granger no. Chen's voice was rough with emotion. We've all been living under his thumb for years, watching him steal land and ruin families, too scared to do anything about it. But if you 2 are making a stand, maybe it's time the rest of us stopped being cowards. The third rider, a younger man named Paul Hendricks, nodded agreement. Granger's going to come at you hard. Everyone knows it. We figured you could use supplies. Maybe extra hands when the time comes. Evelyn stared at them, not quite believing what she was hearing. You're offering to help? After everything? We're offering to stop being useless. Miller's voice cracked. Your father was a good man, Evelyn. He helped half this town when times were tough, and we repaid him by standing silent while Granger drove him into an early grave. That's a debt we can't erase, but maybe we can start making it right. Silas stepped forward, his eyes assessing the men with the careful scrutiny of someone who'd been betrayed before. What's Granger saying about last night? That you're dangerous criminals, Chen said. That you attacked his men without provocation. He's calling in favors, putting pressure on the sheriff to form a posse and come arrest you both. And will they? Chen shook his head. Sheriff's a coward, but he's not stupid. He knows coming out here means a gunfight, and he's not being paid enough to die for Granger. He'll stall as long as he can. Miller climbed down from his horse, moving slowly to show he meant no threat. From his saddlebag, he pulled out packages wrapped in brown paper. Ammunition, food, medical supplies. It's not much, but it's what we could spare. Evelyn's throat went tight. For a year, she'd been alone against the world. Now these men who'd turned their backs on her father, were standing on her porch offering help. Why now? She asked. What changed? You did, Hendricks said simply. We've all been waiting for someone else to be brave first. Turns out, that someone was you. Silas accepted the supplies with a nod of thanks, but his expression remained guarded. Helping us is dangerous. Granger won't forget who sided against him. Let him try. Chen's hand rested on his own sidearm. I'm tired of being afraid, we all are. They stayed for an hour, sharing information about Granger's movements, discussing defensive strategies, and promising to spread the word among other ranchers who might be sympathetic. By the time they left, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Don't trust them completely, Silas warned as they watched the riders disappear. Fear makes people say things they don't mean. When Granger comes with guns, we'll see who actually shows up. You're a real optimist, you know that? I'm a realist. But his tone softened. Though I hope I'm wrong, you deserve allies. That night they ate better than Evelyn had in weeks thanks to Miller's supplies. Real coffee, dried beef, beans that weren't mostly weevils, small luxuries that felt like wealth after months of scraping by. Tell me something, Evelyn said as they sat at the table. If you could go back, change what happened to your family, would you do it knowing it meant you'd never become who you are now? Silas considered the question seriously. That's asking if I'd trade their lives for my education and survival. If I'd undo their deaths, even though it would mean I'd still be that naive kid who couldn't save anyone. He paused. Yeah, I'd make that trade in a heartbeat. I'd rather be useless and have them alive than be skilled and have them dead. But then you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have saved me. Someone else would have. I don't think so. Evelyn leaned forward. I think you're here because this is where you're supposed to be. Because everything that happened, all the pain, all the loss, it led to this moment, to you helping someone who needed it. That's a romantic way of looking at tragedy. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to make sense of it. She met his eyes. My father used to say that suffering either destroys you or forges you into something stronger. I'm starting to think he was right. Silas's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He had his moments. Evelyn smiled sadly. He also drank too much, worked himself to exhaustion, and was too stubborn to ask for help when he needed it. But he loved this land, and he loved me, and that counted for something. It counted for everything. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that happens between people who've seen each other's worst and haven't run away. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the promise of another storm. I'm scared, Evelyn admitted quietly. I know I shouldn't be, or that I should hide it, but I am. I'm terrified that we're going to die here, that Granger's going to win, that everything my father built will burn to ashes. Being scared doesn't make you weak, Silas said. It makes you human. I'm scared too. You? You don't seem afraid of anything. I'm afraid of failing again, afraid of watching someone else die because I wasn't fast enough or smart enough. His hands clenched on the table. I'm afraid that you're trusting me to keep you safe, and I won't be able to. Then we'll be afraid together. Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His skin was rough, scarred, warm. And we'll fight together. And if we die, at least we won't die alone. Silas looked at their joined hands like he didn't quite understand what he was seeing. Then slowly, carefully, his fingers curled around hers. Deal, he said. The moment stretched between them, fragile and fierce. Then Silas pulled away, standing abruptly. I should check the perimeter, make sure nothing's... Thunder cracked overhead, cutting him off. Rain began falling, hard and fast, hammering the roof like bullets. Or maybe I'll stay inside, Silas amended. Evelyn laughed despite everything. Probably wise. They moved to the windows, watching the storm rage across the desert. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines, illuminating the landscape in brief, violent bursts. The drought was truly broken now. Water ran in rivers across the yard, filling the creek bed, soaking into earth that had been cracked and dry for years. It's beautiful, Evelyn whispered. Yeah. But Silas wasn't looking at the storm. He was looking at her. She turned and found his eyes on her face, and something in that gaze made her breath catch. There was hunger there, and loneliness, and a desperate kind of hope that mirrored her own. Silas? I should sleep, he said quickly, breaking the moment. Take first watch. You're injured. I've had worse. He was already moving toward the couch, putting distance between them. Wake me in 4 hours. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to call him back, wanted to say all the things building in her chest, but she didn't. Instead, she watched him settle onto the couch, his hand resting on his gun even as his eyes closed. She took position by the window, rifle across her knees, and watched the storm wash the world clean. Somewhere out there, Victor Granger was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, men were loading guns and sharpening knives and preparing for violence. But for this moment, in this house, there was just the sound of rain and two people who'd found something worth fighting for. Evelyn looked at Silas's sleeping form, this broken, dangerous man who'd crashed into her life and refused to let her die alone, and felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the seed of it, fragile and new. She turned back to the window and kept watch as the storm raged on, knowing that when morning came, the real battle would begin. The storm passed before dawn, leaving the world scrubbed clean and smelling of wet sage. Evelyn woke Silas at first light to find his bandages soaked through with blood again. He'd torn something during the night, probably from sleeping wrong on the couch, but he waved off her concern with the same stubborn pride that was going to get him killed. "It's fine," he said, though his face was gray. "It's not fine. You need rest. I'll rest when we're not waiting for Granger's next move." He stood, wincing, and moved to the window. "Besides, we got company." Evelyn joined him and saw what he meant. A single rider approaching from the west, moving slow and deliberate. Not the posture of an attacker, but not entirely friendly either. "You recognize him?" Silas asked, his hand already on his gun. She squinted against the morning glare. The rider was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and clothes that had seen better decades. Something about the way he sat his horse seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. "No? Should I?" "Maybe not, but I do." Silas's voice went cold. "That's Frank Mercer. Used to ride with the Dalton gang back in the 80s. Thought he was dead." "Outlaw?" "Was. Supposedly went straight after a prison stint in Kansas." Silas moved toward the door. "Stay inside. If this goes bad, shoot him." "Wait." But he was already outside, stepping onto the porch with his revolver drawn but not raised. Evelyn grabbed her rifle and positioned herself at the window, her heart hammering. The rider stopped 30 feet from the house and raised both hands, showing empty palms. "Easy now," the man called out. His voice was rough as sandpaper. "I'm not here for trouble." "Then you picked a hell of a place to visit, Frank," Silas replied. "Last I heard you were in Wyoming." "Last you heard was wrong." Mercer lowered his hand slowly. "Can I climb down? My back ain't what it used to be, and this conversation's going to take a while." Silas considered, then nodded. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Mercer dismounted with the careful movements of a man whose body had taken too much punishment over too many years. Up close, Evelyn could see scars crossing his face, a limp in his left leg, and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. "You gonna invite me in?" Mercer asked. "Or do I stand out here in the sun like a fool?" "Depends on what you're selling." "Information. The kind that might keep you both breathing past next week." Mercer glanced at the house. "That Miss Crow in there? The one Granger's trying to run off?" "What's it to you?" Evelyn called through the window. "Everything, as it happens." Mercer scratched his jaw. "See, I worked for Granger for about 3 months. Security, he called it. Really just hired muscle to intimidate folks who wouldn't sell. But I got eyes and ears, and I don't much like what I saw." Silas hadn't lowered his gun. "Why should we believe you?" "Because I'm risking my neck being here. Granger finds out I talked to you. I'm a dead man." Mercer met Silas's gaze steadily. "And because I know who you are, Kane, heard about your family, what Granger did to them up in Montana. That's why I quit working for him soon as I put the pieces together." The name hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn saw Silas's jaw tighten, saw the war happening behind his eyes. Trust or shoot, believe or kill. "Come inside," Silas said finally. "But if you so much as twitch wrong, I'll put a bullet in you before you hit the floor." "Fair enough." They sat around the kitchen table, Mercer on one side, Silas and Evelyn on the other. The old outlaw looked tired, like a man who'd carried weight too long and was ready to set it down. "Granger's planning something big," Mercer said without preamble. "He's done playing games with you folks. Ray Carver got his pride hurt the other night, and Granger's tired of waiting. He's hired outside help." "How many?" Silas asked. 28 last count. Mercenaries out of Texas. Hard men, not like the local idiots he's been using. These boys fight for real money, And they don't ask questions about who they're killing. Evelyn felt ice in her stomach. 28 against 2. 28 against however many you can rally, Mercer corrected. I heard some ranchers came by yesterday. You got more friends than you think. Friends who'll actually show up when bullets start flying? Silas shook his head. That's a different question. Maybe. But there's something else you should know. Mercer leaned forward. Granger keeps records. Everything he's done for the past 15 years, land theft, bribery, murder contracts, it's all written down in ledgers he keeps in a safe at his ranch house. Insurance, he calls it. Proof against anyone who might turn on him. Silas went very still. You've seen these ledgers? Seen them? Hell, I helped organize them for a week before I understood what I was looking at. Mercer's expression darkened. There's enough evidence in that safe to hang Granger 10 times over. Names, dates, payments, everything federal marshals would need to bring down his whole operation. Why hasn't anyone stolen them before? Because the ranch is a fortress. 20 men on guard at all times, patrols every hour, dogs that'll tear your throat out. And the safe itself is in Granger's private study on the second floor. You'd have to get past all that, crack the safe, and get out alive. Mercer smiled grimly. Nobody's that good or that stupid. Evelyn watched Silas's face and saw the gears turning. She knew what he was thinking before he said it. I could do it, Silas said quietly. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. That's suicide. It's an opportunity. With those ledgers, we could end Granger for good. Not just beat him here, but destroy everything he's built. And get yourself killed in the process. Evelyn turned to Mercer. Tell him he's insane. But Mercer was studying Silas with something like respect. You've done this kind of thing before. I can see it in your eyes. Once or twice. Then you know how bad the odds are. I do. Silas's hands were flat on the table, steady despite the pain he had to be feeling from his wound. But what are the odds if we don't? Granger sends his mercenaries, we fight, maybe we hold them off, or maybe we don't. Either way, he'll keep coming. He'll never stop until we're dead or gone. He looked at Evelyn. This is a chance to cut the head off the snake. It's a chance to get yourself killed, she shot back. We could run, take what we can carry and disappear, start over somewhere he can't reach us. You really believe that? That there's anywhere Granger's money and connections can't reach? Silas shook his head. He found me in 3 different territories. He'll find you too. So what, you're just going to walk into his ranch alone and hope for the best? Not alone. Silas turned to Mercer. You know the layout. Guard rotations, weak points, where the safe is. You help me get in and out, and I'll make sure those ledgers end up in the right hands. Mercer was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. I'm too old for this kind of excitement. You came here to help. This is how you help. I came here to warn you, not commit suicide with you. But there was something in Mercer's voice that suggested he was already considering it. What makes you think we could even crack that safe? It's a Tremont & Sons military grade. Take a professional safecracker hours to get into. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside were lockpicks, thin metal tools that caught the morning light. I'm professional enough. Evelyn stared at him. Where did you learn to crack safes? Those 2 years I spent with Jack Reese? He taught me more than gunfighting. Silas's expression was unreadable. Did what I had to do to survive. Wasn't always proud of it. This is insane, Evelyn said again, but her voice lacked conviction. Because as much as she hated to admit it, Silas was right. Running would just delay the inevitable. If they were going to survive, they needed to destroy Granger completely. When would we do this? She asked, and Silas's eyes snapped to her face. We? You think I'm letting you go alone, after everything? She laughed, sharp and bitter. Not a chance. Evelyn, if something goes wrong, then it goes wrong for both of us. She met his gaze without flinching. You said we'd fight together. That includes stupid, dangerous plans that'll probably get us killed. Mercer cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt this touching moment, but if you're serious about this, it needs to happen tonight. Granger's mercenaries are supposed to arrive tomorrow. Once they're here, security gets tripled. Tonight, then. Silas looked at Evelyn. You sure about this? No, she wanted to say. I'm terrified. But what came out was, yes. They spent the rest of the day planning. Mercer drew out the layout of Granger's ranch on a piece of paper. The main house, the bunkhouse where guards slept, the barn, the positions of regular patrols. The safe was on the second floor, east wing, in a study that overlooked the front entrance. Guard change happens at midnight, Mercer explained. That's your window. 5 minutes when positions are shifting, people are tired and distracted. You slip in through the servants' entrance on the west side, take the back stairs to the second floor, get to the study, crack the safe, and get out before anyone notices. And if someone does notice, Evelyn asked, then you run like hell and pray you're faster than their bullets. Not exactly reassuring. Silas checked his weapons methodically, both revolvers, the rifle, the knife. He moved like a man preparing for ritual, each motion precise and familiar. Evelyn watched him and wondered how many times he'd done this, how many desperate plans he'd executed in his long hunt for revenge. You don't have to come, Silas said without looking up. This is my fight. It stopped being just your fight the moment you walked into that general store. Evelyn picked up her father's rifle and began cleaning it. Besides, you need someone watching your back. I need you alive. Then we'll both stay alive. She met his eyes. Together. That was the deal, remember? Something passed between them. Understanding or acceptance, or maybe just resignation. They were committed now, no turning back. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood, Thomas Miller returned with Samuel Chen and Paul Hendricks. They brought more supplies and news from town. Sheriff's asking questions about the shooting the other night, Miller said. Granger's putting pressure on him to come arrest you both for assault. Let him try, Silas said. We'll be gone by then. Gone where's? Best you don't know. But if we're not back by dawn, he paused. If we're not back, get word to the federal marshal in Denver. Tell them Victor Granger's been running a criminal operation for 15 years and there's evidence to prove it. Chen's eyes widened. You're going after him, tonight. We're ending this. Silas's voice left no room for argument. One way or another. The three ranchers exchanged glances. Finally, Hendricks spoke up. What do you need from us? Keep watch here. If Granger's men come before we get back, hold them off as long as you can. Don't die for it, but buy us time. And if you don't come back at all, then make sure the world knows what Granger is. Silas handed Miller a sealed envelope. Everything Mercer told us is written down in there. Names, locations, what we're planning. If we die, at least let it mean something. Miller took the envelope with shaking hands. You're either the bravest people I've ever met or the craziest. Probably both, Evelyn said. They left as full darkness fell, riding west toward Granger's ranch with Mercer leading the way. The old outlaw knew paths that avoided the main roads, trails that wound through canyons and dry washes where they wouldn't be seen. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like thrown diamonds. Evelyn rode beside Silas, her heart hammering but her hands steady on the reins. Fear was there, coiled tight in her chest, but so was something else. Purpose, maybe. Or just the bone-deep certainty that this was necessary. You scared? Silas asked quietly. Terrified, you? Same. He glanced at her. If this goes wrong, if we get separated, Bo... We won't. But if we do, he insisted, you run. Don't try to save me. Don't look back. Just run, and keep running until you're safe. I'm not leaving you. Evelyn, I said I'm not leaving you. Her voice was fierce. We do this together or not at all. That's not negotiable. Silas was quiet for a moment, then softly, You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Good. You need stubborn right now. Mercer pulled up ahead, raising a hand for them to stop. They'd reached a ridge overlooking Granger's ranch, and the sight below made Evelyn's breath catch. The place was massive, a sprawling hacienda-style mansion surrounded by corrals, barns, and bunkhouses. Lights blazed in windows, and even from a distance she could see armed men patrolling the grounds. It looked less like a ranch and more like a military compound. There, Mercer pointed to the west side of the house. That door leads to the kitchen. Should be unlocked. Servants use it all night. Once you're inside, straight down the hall to the back stairs. Second floor, third door on the right is Granger's study. Guards inside? Silas asked. 2 at the front entrance, 1 at the top of the main staircase. But they don't patrol the back stairs unless something's wrong. Mercer checked his pocket watch. 11:40. You got 20 minutes until shift change. They left the horses tied in a ravine and approached on foot, moving through shadows like ghosts. Evelyn's whole body felt electric with adrenaline, every sense heightened. She could hear the crunch of their boots on gravel, smell wood smoke and horse manure, feel the weight of the rifle slung across her back. Mercer led them to a low wall 30 yards from the house. Beyond it was open ground, illuminated by lanterns hung at regular intervals. Getting across without being seen would be the first test. Wait for the patrol to pass, Mercer whispered, then move fast and quiet. They crouched in darkness, watching two guards walk their circuit around the house. The men were talking, laughing about something, their attention divided. When they rounded the far corner, Mercer gave the signal. Evelyn ran, keeping low, her heart slamming against her ribs. The 30 yards felt like 30 miles. Every second expected a shout, a gunshot, discovery. But they reached the kitchen door without incident, pressing themselves against the wall. Silas tried the handle. It turned. Inside, the kitchen was dark and empty, still smelling of the evening meal. They moved through quickly, finding the hallway Mercer described. Evelyn could hear voices from other parts of the house, footsteps on the floor above, the normal sounds of a household settling for the night. The back stairs were narrow and steep. They climbed in single file, Silas leading, each step carefully placed to avoid creaking. At the top, a hallway stretched in both directions, lit by a single oil lamp. Third door on the right. Silas moved forward, Evelyn right behind him, Mercer bringing up the rear. They reached the study door and Silas tested it. Locked. He pulled out his picks and went to work. Evelyn kept watch down the hallway, her rifle ready, every muscle tense. Seconds ticked past like hours. She could hear Silas breathing, the tiny click and scrape of metal on metal, her own pulse roaring in her ears. The lock clicked open. They slipped inside and Silas closed the door behind them. The study was exactly what Evelyn expected from a man like Granger. Expensive furniture, shelves lined with books that had probably never been read, a massive desk positioned to overlook the grounds through a wide window. And behind the desk, set into the wall, a safe the size of a small trunk. That's it, Mercer whispered. Silas crossed to the safe and knelt, pressing his ear against the metal, his fingers working the dial. Evelyn moved to the window and looked out at the grounds below. She could see guards patrolling, lights in the bunkhouse, the whole compound laid out like a map. And then she saw him, Victor Granger himself, walking from the main house toward the barn, flanked by two men. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall, well-built, with gray hair and the bearing of someone used to absolute power. He moved like he owned the earth beneath his feet. "Silas," she hissed, "Granger's outside." "How long do I have?" "I don't know." "He's just walking, not—" Wait, he's stopping, talking to someone. Behind her, she heard the quiet click and tumble of the safe mechanism. Silas was working fast, his whole focus narrowed to the task. Mercer stood by the door, listening for footsteps in the hall. "Come on," Silas muttered. "Come on." The safe clicked. The door swung open. Inside were ledgers, dozens of them, leather-bound and thick with pages. Silas started pulling them out, stacking them on the desk. Evelyn grabbed a canvas bag from the corner and started shoving books inside. "We can't take them all," Silas said. "Too heavy. We need the most recent ones, the ones with current operations." He was flipping through pages, his eyes scanning dates and entries. "Here, this one covers the last 5 years, and this one—" He stopped, his face going pale. "This has my family's name. The Montana Ranch. The payment to the men who burned it." Evelyn saw his hands shake as he held the ledger. 15 years of hunting, and here was the proof. Written evidence of the crime that had destroyed his life. "Take it," she said. "Take all of them you can carry." They stuffed the bag until it bulged, maybe 20 ledgers total. Not everything, but enough. Silas started to close the safe, then paused. Inside, tucked in the back, was a stack of cash in a small wooden box. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, gold, with a woman's name engraved inside. Caroline, his mother's wedding ring. "He kept it," Silas whispered. "That son of a bitch kept it as a trophy." Evelyn put her hand on his shoulder. "Silas, we need to go." But he was staring at the ring, his whole body rigid with fury. He took everything from them, their lives, their home, their... Footsteps in the hallway. Mercer spun toward the door, his hand on his gun. Someone's coming. Silas pocketed the ring and grabbed the bag of ledgers. They moved toward the window, but the footsteps were already at the door. The handle turned. The door opened, and a young woman in a maid's uniform stepped inside, carrying a tray. She saw them and froze, her mouth opening to scream. Mercer was across the room in 2 strides, his hand covering her mouth. Don't. Please don't. The tray crashed to the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. Evelyn's heart stopped. That noise would bring guards running. We're not going to hurt you, Mercer said quickly. We're just going to leave, and you're going to forget you saw us. Understand? The girl's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded. Mercer lowered his hand. I'm sorry about this. The study, the girl whispered. He'll know someone was here. The safe? Let him know, Silas said. We got what we came for. Shouts erupted from downstairs. Heavy footsteps on the main stairs. They were out of time. Window, Silas ordered. They threw it open and looked down. 15 feet to the ground, maybe more. A bad drop, but survivable. Go! Silas shoved the bag of ledgers at Evelyn. I'll be right behind you. She didn't argue. She climbed through and hung from the ledge, then dropped, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Mercer came next, landing badly and rolling his ankle. Then Silas, the impact making him grunt in pain as his wound reopened. Alarms were ringing now, guards pouring from the bunkhouse, dogs barking, the entire compound coming alive. They ran, across the yard, past corrals, through the darkness with shouts and gunfire erupting behind them. Bullets whined past Evelyn's head, kicked up dirt at her feet. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, the bag of ledgers clutched to her chest. Behind them, Mercer stumbled. He went down hard, his bad ankle giving out completely. Silas skidded to a stop. Get up. Can't. It's broken. Mercer's face was twisted with pain. Go. I'll buy you time. We're not leaving you. You have to. Mercer pulled his gun and turned back toward the pursuing guards. Those ledgers are worth more than my life. Get them to Denver. End this bastard. Frank, go! Mercer opened fire, and guards scattered for cover. Silas grabbed Evelyn's arm and dragged her forward. They ran through the darkness, Mercer's gunfire echoing behind them, giving them the seconds they needed to disappear into the ravine where the horses waited. They mounted and rode hard, not looking back, as the sounds of the firefight faded behind them. Evelyn didn't let herself think about Mercer, about whether he was alive or dead, about the cost of what they'd just done. She just rode, the bag of ledgers secure, the night rushing past in a blur of motion and fear. They were a mile away when Silas finally slowed his horse. His face was gray, his bandages soaked with fresh blood. The ride was killing him, but he didn't stop. Is he dead? Evelyn asked. Probably. Silas's voice was hollow. He knew the risks. He saved us. Yeah, he did. They rode in silence after that, pushing the horses as hard as they dared, putting distance between themselves and Granger's ranch. Dawn was still hours away. They had to reach Black Hollow, get the ledgers hidden, and prepare for what came next. Because Granger would come, with all his mercenaries, all his rage, everything he had. And this time, there would be no mercy. They reached the ranch just as the first gray light touched the eastern horizon. Silas nearly fell from his horse, his face white as bone, blood soaking through his shirt in a spreading stain that looked black in the dim light. Evelyn caught him as he stumbled, bearing his weight despite her own exhaustion. Inside, she said. Now. Miller and Chen rushed from the house where they'd been keeping watch. Between the 3 of them, they got Silas to the kitchen table and laid him out. His breathing was shallow, labored, and when Evelyn cut away the bandages, she saw the wound had torn completely open. How bad? Silas asked through gritted teeth. Bad enough that you need to shut up and let me work. She sent Chen for water and clean cloth, her hands already moving with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd patched too many injuries over the past few days. Miller stared at the canvas bag on the floor, the ledgers spilling out. You got them. You actually got them. Mercer didn't make it, Evelyn said, threading a needle. She didn't have proper medical supplies, just regular sewing thread and whiskey. It would have to do. He bought us time to escape. Then we can't let it be for nothing. Miller picked up one of the ledgers and flipped it open. His face went pale as he read. Sweet heaven, there are names here, dates, payments for murders going back 15 years. That's why we need to get them to Denver, Silas managed. Federal marshal named Carson Webb. He's honest, or as honest as they come out here. He'll know what to do with them. Denver's 3 days hard ride, Chen said, returning with water. And Granger will have men watching every road between here and there. Evelyn began stitching the wound, and Silas's whole body went rigid. She'd seen her father do this once, sewing up a ranch hand who'd been gored by a bull. The man had screamed. Silas didn't make a sound, but sweat poured down his face, and his hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to make the wood creak. Someone else has to take them, Evelyn said. Silas can't ride, and I need to stay here. They'll come for the ranch, and we need to be ready. I'll go. Hendrik stepped forward from the doorway. None of them had heard him arrive. I can be in Denver in 2 days if I push hard. I know trails that avoid the main roads. They'll kill you if they catch you, Silas warned. Then I won't get caught. Hendricks picked up the bag of ledgers. My father lost his ranch to Granger 5 years ago. Died of a broken heart 6 months later. If these books can put that bastard in the ground, I'll crawl to Denver on my hands and knees if I have to. Evelyn finished the stitching and wrapped fresh bandages around Silas's torso. The wound looked better, but infection was a real risk. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to whatever strength he had left. Go now, she said to Hendricks. Before full light, and don't stop for anything. Hendricks nodded and was gone, the bag of evidence disappearing with him into the pre-dawn darkness. Evelyn watched through the window as he rode east, pushing his horse hard, and prayed he'd make it. How long before they come? Miller asked. Silas tried to sit up and failed. Hours, maybe less. Granger knows we have his records. He can't let us live, and he can't let those ledgers reach Denver. Then we prepare. Chen's voice was steady. How many guns do we have? Not enough, Evelyn counted in her head. My father's rifle, Silas's weapons, whatever you three brought. Maybe a dozen weapons total against, what did Mercer say? 28 mercenaries plus Granger's regular men? Closer to 40 then. Miller didn't flinch from the math. We'll need help. Where are we going to find help? Everyone in Black Hollow is too scared to... Not everyone. Chen was already moving toward the door. There are more like us, ranchers who've lost land, families who've been ruined. They've been waiting for someone to make a stand. Now's the time. He left at a run, and Miller followed. That left Evelyn alone with Silas, the morning light growing stronger through the windows, and the certainty that violence was coming. You should have left me, Silas said quietly. Taken the ledgers yourself and run. And abandoned the ranch? Everything my father built? She sat down heavily, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Besides, we had a deal, together or not at all. That deal's going to get you killed. Probably. She looked at him. This broken, stubborn man who'd ridden into her life like something out of a dream or a nightmare. She still wasn't sure which. But at least I won't die wondering what might have happened if I'd been braver. Silas reached for her hand and held it, his grip weak but warm. You're already the bravest person I know. Then we're both fools. Yeah, we are. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, both of them too tired to move, too scared to sleep. Outside, the ranch looked peaceful in the golden morning light. The windmill turning, the creek running with yesterday's rain, the cattle grazing on grass that was finally starting to come back. It looked like a place worth saving, maybe worth dying for. Around mid-morning, riders started arriving. Chen returned with 3 ranchers and their sons, all armed. Miller brought 5 more men from town, including the blacksmith and 2 farmers who'd lost land to Granger. By noon, they had 23 people gathered at the ranch, which was 21 more than Evelyn had expected. This is everyone who would come, Chen said. The others are too scared, or they still think Granger's untouchable. 23 is better than 2, Silas said. He was on his feet now, moving slow but moving. The man's constitution was inhuman. We can work with this. They spent the afternoon preparing. Evelyn showed them the defensive positions she and Silas had identified. The barn, the house, the high ground near the windmill. They distributed ammunition, checked weapons, and talked through scenarios for what might happen when Granger came. They'll try to burn us out, Silas explained. That's Granger's favorite tactic, fire and fear. We need to stop that first. Buckets of water at every position, wet blankets ready to smother flames. If the barn catches, let it go. The house is what matters. A young farmer named Robert raised his hand. What if they just surround us and wait? They got more food, more supplies. They could starve us out. They won't wait, Silas said with certainty. Granger's a man used to getting what he wants immediately, and he knows those ledgers are on their way to Denver. Every hour he delays is another hour closer to federal marshals arriving. He'll come hard and fast, trying to end this quick. And if we lose, someone asked, then we lose fighting, which is better than living on our knees. Silas met each person's eyes in turn. I won't lie to you, the odds are bad. A lot of us probably won't see tomorrow. But if we win, if we hold them off long enough for those ledgers to reach Denver, then Granger's empire falls. Every ranch he stole, every family he ruined, all of it comes to light. That's what we're fighting for. Justice for all of us. The room was quiet. Then Miller stood up. My brother killed himself after Granger took his land. Said he couldn't live with the shame of losing everything. I've carried that for 3 years, wishing I'd done something, anything, to help him. His voice cracked. I'm not running this time. Whatever happens, I'm seeing this through. Others nodded, voices rising in agreement. These weren't soldiers or gunslingers. They were farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, ordinary people who'd been pushed too far and finally decided to push back. Evelyn felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since her father died. She wasn't alone anymore. None of them were. As sunset approached, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, a rider appeared on the eastern horizon. Everyone grabbed their weapons, but Silas shook his head. That's not an attack. Single rider, white flag. The rider came closer, resolving into Ray Carver sitting tall in his saddle, a white cloth tied to his rifle. He stopped 50 yards from the house and called out, I got a message from Mr. Granger. He wants to parley. Silas stepped onto the porch, his hand resting on his gun despite the flag of truce. What's there to talk about? Terms of surrender. Ray's silver tooth flashed in the dying light. You give back what you stole and Mr. Granger will let everyone here walk away alive. You got 1 hour to decide. Tell Granger he can take his terms and— Wait! Evelyn put her hand on Silas's arm and stepped forward. What guarantee do we have? Granger's word isn't worth the spit it takes to say it. Ray's face darkened. Mr. Granger is a man of honor. Mr. Granger is a murderer and a thief, Evelyn shot back. And we're not giving him anything. Those ledgers are halfway to Denver by now. By this time tomorrow, federal marshals will know everything he's done. So you go back and tell him that we're not surrendering, we're not running, and if he wants this ranch, he can try to take it. Ray's hand moved toward his gun, but he stopped himself. You're signing your own death warrant. Maybe, but at least we'll die free. Evelyn's voice rang out clear and strong. Now get off my land before I shoot you for trespassing. Ray stared at her for a long moment, then wheeled his horse and rode back the way he came. When he disappeared over the ridge, everyone let out a collective breath. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest, Chen said. Definitely stupid, Evelyn admitted, but I'm tired of being scared. Night fell fast and complete. They lit no lanterns, wanting to preserve their night vision. Guards rotated every 2 hours, watching the darkness for movement. Inside the house, people tried to rest, but nobody really slept. The air was thick with tension and the certainty that dawn would bring blood. Evelyn found Silas sitting alone on the back porch, staring at something in his hand. His mother's wedding ring, the one he'd taken from Granger's safe. I used to think finding this would make me feel better, he said, without looking up. Proof that I'd avenged them, that their deaths meant something. But all I feel is tired. She sat beside him. Tired of what? Of carrying hate, of waking up every morning with revenge as the only thing keeping me going. He closed his fist around the ring. I've spent 15 years hunting Granger, and for what? My family's still gone. Nothing I do will bring them back. No. But you've stopped him from destroying more families. That counts for something. Does it? Or have I just been using justice as an excuse to keep killing? Silas looked at her, and his eyes were raw with pain. I've done terrible things, Evelyn. Things I can't take back. Men I've killed who probably deserved it, but maybe didn't. I tell myself it was necessary, that I was making the world better, but sometimes I think I'm just as much a monster as Granger. You're not. She took his hand, the one holding the ring. Monsters don't question themselves. They don't feel guilt or regret. You've done hard things, violent things, but you did them to protect people. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, the line looks pretty thin. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. My father once told me that pain shapes us, but it doesn't define us. We decide who we become. You could have turned into someone like Granger, using your hurt as an excuse to hurt others. But you didn't. You used it to protect people. That's the difference. Silas's jaw worked like he was trying not to cry. I wanted them to be proud of me, my parents, Emma. I wanted to make their deaths mean something, but I think they'd be ashamed of what I became. I think they'd be proud that you survived, that you kept fighting even when everything was taken from you. She squeezed his hand, and I think they'd want you to forgive yourself. I don't know how. Neither do I, but maybe we figure it out together. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. When this is over, if we survive, I want to stay. Help you rebuild the ranch. Build something good instead of just destroying what's bad. I'd like that, Evelyn said, and meant it. They sat in the darkness, holding hands, while the stars wheeled overhead and the night pressed close around them. Whatever came with the dawn, at least they'd face it together. The attack came just before midnight. No warning, no shouts, just sudden gunfire erupting from 3 directions at once. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning as bullets tore through the night, smashing windows, splintering wood, kicking up dirt. "Positions!" Silas roared, and everyone scattered to their assigned posts. Evelyn grabbed her rifle and made for the upstairs window that overlooked the front yard. Through the darkness, she could see shapes moving, men on horseback, men on foot, too many to count. Torches flickered at the edges of her vision. She fired at a shape and saw it go down. No time to think about what that meant, who that person was, whether they had family. Just reload and fire again. Below, Silas was directing the defense from the front porch, his revolver barking out shots with mechanical precision. Miller and Chen held the barn, their rifles cracking in steady rhythm. The blacksmith and his sons were at the windmill, creating a crossfire that caught the attackers in a deadly box. But there were so many. For every man that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. Granger had brought everything: his mercenaries, his regular men, hired guns from God knew where. The ranch was surrounded, besieged from all sides. A torch arced through the air and landed on the barn roof. Flames caught immediately, spreading fast despite the water buckets. Miller and Chen had to abandon their position, falling back to the house as fire consumed the structure. "They're flanking left!" someone shouted. Evelyn swung her rifle and saw men rushing the house from the side, using the burning barn as cover. She fired, worked the bolt, fired again. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, her ears rang from the constant gunfire, but she didn't stop. Then she saw him. Victor Granger himself, sitting on a white horse well back from the fighting, directing his men like a general. Even from a distance, she could see his calm confidence. He thought he'd already won. "Silas!" she called down. "Granger's here, northeast, maybe 100 yards." She saw Silas turn, saw him raise his rifle and take aim. The shot rang out, impossibly loud even in the chaos. Granger's horse reared and screamed, but the man himself was untouched. He'd moved at the last second, pure luck or instinct. Granger's eyes found Silas through the darkness and smoke. Even from a distance, Evelyn could feel the weight of that gaze, pure hatred, cold and calculating. Then Granger turned and rode away, back into the darkness, and the attack intensified. This wasn't about taking the ranch anymore. This was about annihilation. A bullet punched through the wall beside Evelyn's head, showering her with splinters. She ducked, her heart hammering. They couldn't hold this. There were too many attackers, too much firepower. "Fall back to the house," Silas ordered. "Everyone inside." The defenders retreated, dragging wounded with them. Robert, the young farmer, had been shot in the leg. One of Chen's friends wasn't moving. They left him where he fell, no time to check if he was dead or just unconscious. Inside the house, they barricaded doors and windows while bullets continued to tear through the walls. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky, and Evelyn could feel the heat even from inside. "We're trapped," Miller said, his voice shaking. "They've got us surrounded." "Then we make them pay for every inch," Silas said grimly. He was reloading his revolvers with steady hands despite the blood soaking his shirt. His wound had reopened again, but there was no time to tend it. The attackers tried to rush the house 3 times, and 3 times they were driven back by concentrated fire. Bodies littered the yard, and the screams of the wounded cut through the night like knives. This wasn't war, it was slaughter. Then, as suddenly as it started, the gunfire stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the noise. They waited, weapons ready, watching the darkness for the next assault. A voice called out from the yard. "Ray Carver. You're done! The barn's gone! The house is next! Come out now and we'll make it quick!" "Go to hell!" Evelyn shouted back. "Your choice. We got all night and you're bleeding out in there. Only a matter of time." He was right. They had maybe a dozen fighters left in condition to shoot. Ammunition was running low. The house was damaged, defensible, but barely. Without reinforcements or a miracle, they'd be overrun by dawn. Silas met Evelyn's eyes across the room. She saw the calculation there, the desperate math of impossible odds. He was thinking about surrender, about trading himself for the others' lives. "Don't," she said. "Don't even think it. If I give myself up, they'll kill you and then kill the rest of us anyway." She crossed to him, grabbed his face in both hands. "We fight, together, to the last bullet." He nodded, and something like peace settled over his features. If they were going to die, at least they'd die on their own terms. Then, from the east, they heard it. Horses. Lots of them, moving fast. Ray heard it too. "What the hell?" The riders came out of the darkness like avenging angels. At least 30 of them, maybe more, descending on Granger's men from behind. Federal marshals, their badges glinting in the firelight, led by a man on a black horse who could only be Carson Webb. And at the front of the charge, riding like his life depended on it, was Paul Hendricks. "He made it," Evelyn whispered. "He actually made it." The battle turned in seconds. Granger's men, caught between the house and the marshals, broke and ran. Some tried to fight and were cut down or arrested. Others threw down their weapons and surrendered. The whole attack collapsed like a house of cards. By the time the sun rose, it was over. Marshal Webb approached the house slowly, his hands visible. "Evelyn Crow? Silas Kane? I'm Carson Webb, federal marshal out of Denver. Paul Hendricks brought me your evidence. I have warrants for Victor Granger and 43 of his associates." Evelyn stepped onto the porch, hardly believing it. "Where's Granger? Fled when he saw us coming, but he won't get far. I've got men on every road between here and the border." Webb looked at the burned barn, the bodies in the yard, the house riddled with bullet holes. "Looks like you folks had a rough night." "You could say that." Silas emerged, leaning heavily on the doorframe. He looked half dead, but there was something like hope in his eyes. "The ledgers. Did Hendricks get them all to you?" "Everyone. Been reading them all night." Webb's expression was grim. "What Granger's done, it's worse than I imagined. This goes beyond land theft, bribery, murder, conspiracy. It touches 3 territories and more than 100 victims. With this evidence, I can bring him down completely." "If you catch him," Evelyn said. "When I catch him," Webb corrected. "Men like Granger always make mistakes when they're desperate. He'll slip up, and when he does, I'll be there." He was right. They found Granger 2 days later trying to cross into Mexico with a saddlebag full of cash. He fought the marshals and took a bullet in the shoulder for his trouble. They dragged him back to Denver in chains. The trial was everything Evelyn had dreamed of, and nothing like she'd expected. It took place in a packed courthouse, with survivors from half a dozen territories coming forward to testify. Granger sat in the defendant's chair looking smaller than he ever had, his expensive suit unable to hide the fact that he was just a man after all. Not a monster, not a force of nature, just a greedy, cruel man who'd hurt people for profit. Silas took the stand on the 3rd day. The courtroom fell silent as he spoke about the night his family died, about the screams he'd heard, about spending 15 years hunting the man responsible. His voice never wavered, but Evelyn saw his hands shake. When the prosecutor asked him to identify the man who'd ordered his family's murder, Silas pointed at Granger without hesitation. "That's him, Victor Granger. He killed my parents and my sister for a piece of land with good water. He burned them alive and kept my mother's wedding ring as a trophy." The jury looked at Granger with disgust. The ledgers had already proven his guilt, but Silas's testimony made it personal, made it real. The verdict came down 5 days later. Guilty on all counts: murder, arson, land theft, fraud, bribery, conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to hang, and when the gavel fell, Granger showed no emotion at all. He just stared straight ahead, already dead inside. Outside the courthouse, Evelyn found Silas sitting on the steps, staring at his mother's ring. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes. I thought I'd feel different, vindicated maybe, or satisfied." He turned the ring over in his fingers. "But I just feel empty, like I've been running towards something for 15 years, and now that I've reached it, there's nothing there." "That's because revenge isn't an ending. It's just an ending of one chapter." She sat beside him. "Now you get to start a new one." "What if I don't know how? What if hunting Granger is all I know how to do?" "Then you learn. We both do." She took his hand. "Come back to Black Hollow with me. Help me rebuild the ranch. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Silas looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. Not the grim, cold smile of a man planning violence, but something genuine and warm. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." They stayed in Denver for Granger's execution, though Evelyn wasn't sure why. Maybe they needed to see it end completely, needed to watch the man who'd caused so much pain finally face consequences. The hanging took place at dawn in the prison yard. Granger walked to the gallows with his head high, refusing a blindfold or final words. When the trap dropped, it was over in seconds. Evelyn waited for some feeling of closure, some sense that justice had been served. But all she felt was tired. Killing Granger didn't bring back her father or Silas's family. It didn't erase the years of pain and loss. It was just an ending, clinical and final. As they rode back to Black Hollow, Silas was quiet. Evelyn didn't push him to talk. Some things needed to be processed in silence. It wasn't until they crested the ridge overlooking her ranch, their ranch now, that he finally spoke. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I've spent half my life focused on one thing. Now that it's done, I don't know who I am without it." "You're Silas Kane. You're a man who survived terrible things and came out the other side. You're someone who protects people." She paused. "And if you'll have me, you're the man I want to build a life with." He turned to her, surprise and something like joy flickering across his face. "You mean that?" Every word. He leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her, and it felt like coming home. The ranch looked worse in daylight than it had in darkness. The barn was a blackened skeleton, ribs of charred timber reaching toward the sky like the bones of some prehistoric beast. Bullet holes pocked the house walls, windows were shattered, and the yard was torn up from horses and gunfire. But the windmill still turned, the creek still ran, and the cattle, what few remained, still grazed on grass that was finally coming back green. Evelyn stood in the middle of the destruction and felt something unexpected. Not despair, but possibility. "It's a mess," Silas said, dismounting beside her. His wound was healing slowly, and he moved like an old man, but he was alive. That counted for more than she could say. "It's fixable." She turned in a slow circle, cataloging the damage. "The house just needs repairs. We can rebuild the barn. It'll take time, but we've got time now." He smiled, and it still looked strange on his face, like he was learning a language he'd never spoken before. "Granger's dead. His empire's collapsed. For the first time in 15 years, I'm not running towards something or away from something. I'm just here." "How's it feel?" "Terrifying," he admitted. "I don't know how to just be normal. How to wake up without revenge driving me forward. What do people even do with peaceful mornings? I guess we figure it out together." She took his hand. "Come on. Let's see what we're working with." They spent the afternoon assessing the damage. The house was structurally sound despite the bullet holes and broken windows. Most of the furniture had survived, though the kitchen table had taken a round straight through the center. The barn would need to be torn down completely and rebuilt from scratch. The fences were mostly intact, which was something. As they worked, neighbors started arriving. Miller came first, bringing lumber and nails from his store. Chen and his sons showed up with tools and fresh water. Even people Evelyn didn't know, ranchers from neighboring valleys who'd heard what happened, rode in offering help. "Figured you could use some hands," one grizzled rancher said. "What you did, standing up to Granger, that took more guts than most of us have. Least we can do is help you rebuild." By evening, they had 20 people working on the ranch. Some were clearing debris, others patching walls, a few starting to frame out a new barn. The work was hard and hot, but there was something almost joyful about it. Like they were building more than just a ranch. They were building proof that Granger hadn't won, that good people could outlast evil ones if they just refused to give up. Evelyn found Silas sitting on what remained of the porch steps as the sun started to set. He was watching the workers, his expression distant. "You okay?" she asked. "Just thinking about my father. He loved building things. Used to say that any fool could tear something down, but it took real skill to create something that lasted." Silas's voice was soft. "I spent so long focused on destruction, hunting Granger, planning revenge. I forgot what it felt like to build." "Well, you're about to remember." She sat beside him. "Because we've got a lot of building ahead of us. I'm not sure I'm cut out for it. I know guns and tracking and violence. I don't know the first thing about running a ranch. Neither did I when my father died. But I learned." She bumped her shoulder against his. "Besides, you're not doing it alone. We've got help now. A whole community of people who are invested in seeing this place succeed." Miller approached, wiping sweat from his face. "Got the windows boarded up for tonight. Tomorrow we can start on proper repairs. Chen's bringing glass from town." "Thank you," Evelyn said, "for everything. I know it wasn't easy, standing with us against Granger. Should have done it sooner. Should have done it when your father was alive." Miller's voice cracked. "That's a regret I'll carry the rest of my life. But at least I can try to make it right now." After he left, Silas turned to Evelyn. "You think people can really change? Make up for past mistakes?" "I think people can try. Whether it's enough..." She shrugged. "I guess that depends on what they do moving forward. I've killed men, Evelyn, not just in self-defense, cold, calculated killings. How do I make up for that?" "You can't. Some things you just have to carry." She met his eyes. "But you can choose what you do next. You can choose to be someone who protects instead of someone who destroys. That won't erase the past, but it might balance the scales a little." He was quiet for a long moment. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if the darkness comes back? Then I'll be there to remind you who you are, and you'll do the same for me." She took his hand. "That's what love is, I think. Helping each other stay human when the world tries to turn us into monsters." Silas looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Love? Yeah." Her heart was hammering, but she didn't look away. "I love you, Silas Kane. I love how you walked into that store when no one else would. I love how you fight for people even when it costs you everything. I love that you're trying to be better than your worst moments." She paused. "And I'm scared to death that you'll wake up one day and realize you don't want this quiet life, that you'll go back to hunting and violence because it's what you know. But I'm willing to risk it if you are." He pulled her close and kissed her, and when they broke apart, his eyes were wet. "I love you too," he said, "and I'm terrified I'll let you down. But I want to try. I want to be the man you see when you look at me, not the man I've been." "Then that's enough. We'll figure out the rest." They sat together as darkness fell and the workers headed home, promising to return tomorrow. The ranch was quiet except for the wind and the distant sound of cattle. It felt like the first real peace either of them had known in years. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of hard work and slow healing. The new barn went up board by board, the house got patched and painted, the fences were reinforced. Silas threw himself into the labor with an intensity that worried Evelyn at first, but she came to understand it. He was building something good to replace all the destruction he'd caused. Every nail he drove, every post he set, was an act of redemption. He wasn't perfect at it. Some days the old darkness crept back and she'd find him staring at the horizon with haunted eyes, his hand resting on his gun like he expected ghosts to come riding out of the past. On those days, she'd sit with him and talk about small things, the weather, the cattle, plans for the spring planting, until he came back to himself. And some days it was Evelyn who struggled. She'd wake in the night from dreams of her father dying alone while she slept, or of the attack on the ranch, of men screaming and the barn burning. On those nights, Silas would hold her and tell her she was safe, that it was over, that they'd won. And gradually, the nightmares came less frequently. 2 months after Granger's execution, Marshal Webb visited with news. The federal government had seized all of Granger's assets and was in the process of returning stolen land to its rightful owners. Families who'd been ruined were getting their ranches back. Evidence from the ledgers had led to arrests across 3 territories: corrupt sheriffs, bought judges, accomplices in Granger's schemes. The whole rotten structure was coming down. "There's something else," Webb said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "The territorial governor wanted me to deliver this personally." Inside was a letter and a bank draft. The letter explained that as one of the key witnesses against Granger, and as someone who'd risked her life to bring him to justice, Evelyn was entitled to compensation from the seized assets. The bank draft was for $5,000. Evelyn stared at the number, unable to process it. This has to be a mistake. No mistake. The governor was very clear. "You're a hero, Miss Crow. Both of you are." After Webb left, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, the new one they'd built to replace the one that got shot, and tried to wrap her mind around it. $5,000, she said. That's enough to rebuild everything, buy new cattle, hire hands, expand the operation. It's enough to start over somewhere else too, Silas said carefully. Buy land that doesn't have blood soaked into the soil. Build something fresh. She looked at him. Is that what you want? I want whatever makes you happy. If staying here is too painful, if there are too many ghosts... There are ghosts everywhere, Silas. Running from them doesn't make them disappear. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. My father built this place with his own hands. He poured his life into this land. And yeah, he died here. And yeah, we almost died here too. But we didn't. We survived. And I'll be damned if I let Granger, even dead, drive me off this land. Silas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Then we stay. We build this place into something amazing. Something worth all the pain it took to keep it. Together? Together. They married in the spring, just as the desert was blooming with wildflowers that most people had never seen before. The drought had truly broken, and the land was coming back to life in ways that seemed almost miraculous. The ceremony took place on the ranch, with half of Black Hollow in attendance. Miller gave Evelyn away, tears streaming down his weathered face. Chen stood as Silas's best man, joking that someone needed to make sure the groom didn't run off. The vows were simple, spoken under the open sky with the windmill turning in the background and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. When the circuit preacher asked if Silas would take Evelyn as his wife, he said yes with a voice that didn't shake. When Evelyn was asked the same, she looked into Silas's gray eyes, still hard, still carrying ghosts, but warmer now, more human, and said yes like she'd never been more certain of anything. The celebration lasted into the night, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. People told stories about Evelyn's father, about the siege of the ranch, about the trial. With each retelling, the story grew a little bigger, a little more mythic. Evelyn didn't mind. Myths had power. They gave people something to believe in. As the party wound down and guests started heading home, Silas and Evelyn stood together watching the stars. You think this is real? Silas asked. Or are we going to wake up and find out it was all a dream? If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up. She leaned against him. A year ago, I was alone and hopeless, waiting for Granger to take everything. Now I'm married to a man I love. The ranch is thriving, and we've got a future. If that's not real, it should be. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for something to go wrong. Something will go wrong eventually. That's life. She turned to face him. But we'll handle it. Together. That's the point. He kissed her forehead. When did you get so wise? About the same time I got desperate enough to trust a dangerous stranger who walked into a general store like he owned the place. Best decision you ever made. Second best. First was telling Granger to go to hell. They laughed, and it felt good. Natural. Like maybe they were finally learning how to be normal people instead of survivors in constant fight-or-flight mode. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were good. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They bought more cattle with the government money, hired 2 hands to help with the work, and expanded their operation to include horse breeding. Silas discovered he had a gift for training horses, a patience and understanding that surprised even him. Horses are honest, he told Evelyn one evening as he worked with a particularly skittish mare. They don't lie about what they're feeling. You just have to pay attention and meet them where they are. Sounds like good advice for people too, she said. Yeah, still working on that part. Their first child, a son, was born in the winter of 1889. They named him Thomas after Evelyn's father, And from the moment Silas held the tiny, squalling infant, something fundamental shifted in him. The hardness that had always lived in his eyes softened. The tension he carried in his shoulders eased. "I'm terrified," he confessed to Evelyn as they watched Thomas sleep. "What if I'm a terrible father? What if I mess him up? Then we'll mess him up together and hope he forgives us someday." She smiled. "But I think you're going to be great. You know what it's like to lose family. You'll fight like hell to protect this one." She was right. Silas threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hunting. He was patient when Thomas cried through the night, gentle when teaching him to walk, fiercely protective when he took his first tumble and scraped his knee. Watching him transform from a hardened gunfighter into a devoted father was like watching ice melt in spring. Their second child, a daughter, came 2 years later. They named her Sarah, and where Thomas was rough and tumble like his father, Sarah was sharp and curious like her mother. By the time she was 3, she was already asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. "Why did the bad man want to hurt you?" she asked Evelyn one day, apropos of nothing. Evelyn looked at Silas, who nodded slightly. They'd agreed to never lie to their children about the past. "Because he wanted something that belonged to us," Evelyn said carefully. "And he thought taking it by force was easier than earning it honestly. But you stopped him." "We did. Your father and I, and a lot of brave people from town." "Did people die?" The question hung in the air. Sarah was too young to understand death, really, but old enough to know it was serious. "Yes," Silas said. "Some good people died protecting what they believed in, and some bad people died because they chose violence over peace." "Are you still scared?" Silas knelt down to her level. "Sometimes, but being scared doesn't mean you stop living. It just means you're careful and you hold tight to the people you love." Sarah considered this with the gravity of a much older person. "I love you, Papa." "I love you too, sweetheart." Evelyn watched the exchange and felt her throat tighten. This was what they'd fought for. Not just land or justice, but the chance to build a family in peace. The chance to give their children something better than what they'd had. As Thomas and Sarah grew, the ranch grew with them. Black Hollow transformed too, slowly shaking off the shadow Granger had cast over it. Honest people replaced corrupt officials. New businesses opened. Families that had fled during Granger's reign started trickling back. The town became what it should have been all along, a real community where people looked out for each other. Silas never completely lost the edge that violence had given him. He still slept with a gun within reach, still scanned crowds for threats, still had days where the ghost came calling. But those days grew fewer and farther between, pushed back by the simple, relentless goodness of ordinary life. One evening, when Thomas was 12 and Sarah was 10, they sat around the dinner table and Thomas asked the question Evelyn had been dreading. "Is it true what they say in town, that you killed a bunch of men before you came here?" Silas set down his fork carefully. "Where'd you hear that?" "Billy Watson said his dad said you were a gunfighter, that you hunted people for money." "Billy Watson's dad is half right." Silas met his son's eyes. "I did hunt people, but not for money, for justice. Or what I thought was justice at the time." "Did you kill them?" "Some of them, yes." Sarah was listening intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Were they bad people?" "Most of them, but that doesn't make killing them right." Silas's voice was steady but heavy. "I did what I thought I had to do to stop a man who'd hurt a lot of people, including my family. But violence, even righteous violence, leaves marks on you and on the world." "Do you regret it?" Thomas asked. Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the man I had to become to do it. But I don't regret stopping someone who would have kept hurting people if I hadn't." He looked at both his children. "The world isn't simple. Sometimes there are no good choices, only less bad ones. What matters is trying to do better whenever you can." "Billy's dad says you're dangerous," Thomas said. "I am," Silas acknowledged. "I know how to hurt people, and I'm good at it. But I choose not to use those skills unless I absolutely have to protect someone I love. That's the difference between being dangerous and being evil." "I think you're brave," Sarah said quietly. "You did scary things to save people. That's what heroes do." Silas smiled sadly. "Heroes are just scared people who didn't run away. And most of us spend the rest of our lives trying to make peace with what we did." After the kids went to bed, Evelyn found Silas on the porch, staring at the stars like he always did when the past weighed too heavy. "You handled that well," she said. "Did I? I just told our children their father is a killer." "You told them the truth, that you're a complicated person who did hard things for good reasons." She sat beside him. "They need to know that. The world's not black and white. People aren't purely good or purely evil. I want them to be better than me, to never have to make the choices I made. They will be, because they're growing up with love and security instead of violence and loss. Because they have a father who teaches them that strength isn't just about fighting, and a mother who shows them that courage looks like standing your ground, even when you're terrified." Silas pulled her close. "How'd I get so lucky?" "You walked into a general store at exactly the right moment. Everything else just followed from there." The years continued to roll past, marked by seasons and harvests, by children growing and the ranch prospering. Thomas became a skilled horseman, passionate about the ranch in a way that made Silas's eyes shine with pride. Sarah developed a fascination with medicine after Chen's wife taught her basic first aid, and she talked constantly about becoming a doctor. "Girls can't be doctors," Thomas said one evening, in the superior tone of a 15-year-old who thought he knew everything. "Says who?" Sarah shot back. She was 13 now, tall and fierce like her mother. "Women can do anything men can do, maybe better." "That's not—" "Your sister's right," Silas interrupted. "I've seen women do things that would make most men cry. Never underestimate someone because of what they are. Judge them by what they do." "But there are no women doctors," Thomas protested. "Then maybe Sarah will be the first one in these territories," Evelyn said. "Wouldn't that be something?" Sarah's eyes lit up with determination, and Evelyn recognized that look. It was the same one she'd worn when refusing to surrender to Granger. The same stubborn refusal to accept that something was impossible just because it was hard. When Sarah turned 18, she left for medical school back east, one of only 3 women accepted that year. The day she left, Silas cried for the first time since Evelyn had known him, not from sadness, but from pride so fierce it had nowhere else to go. "She's going to change the world," he said, watching the stage disappear in a cloud of dust. "She learned from the best," Evelyn replied. Thomas stayed and ran the ranch, marrying a smart woman from Denver who loved the land as much as he did. They gave Silas and Evelyn 4 grandchildren, rambunctious kids who ran wild across the property and brought life and noise to every corner. The years were kind to Black Hollow. The town grew into a small city with a railroad connection and enough prosperity that people stopped leaving for bigger opportunities elsewhere. The Crow Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the territory, known for quality horses and cattle, but more for the integrity of the people who ran it. Silas's hair went gray, then white. The old wound in his side ached when storms came through. His hands, once so quick with a gun, grew stiff with arthritis. But he still woke up every morning beside Evelyn, still worked the ranch alongside Thomas, still told stories to his grandchildren about the old days when asked. He never forgot what he'd been. The violence he'd committed lived in him like old scars, visible when he moved certain ways, painful when the weather changed. But it didn't define him anymore. He'd built something bigger than his past, and that was enough. On a warm evening in late summer, 40 years after that day in the general store, Silas and Evelyn sat on the porch of the ranch house, rebuilt and expanded over the decades until it bore little resemblance to the place they'd defended against Granger's men. Around them, their grandchildren played while Thomas and his wife prepared dinner. Sarah was visiting from back east, now a renowned surgeon who'd saved countless lives. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't walked into that store?" Evelyn asked. Her hair was silver now, her face lined with age, but her eyes were still sharp and bright. "Every day," Silas admitted. His voice was rougher with age, but still strong. "You'd probably be dead. I'd probably be dead too, killed in some dusty town hunting Granger. None of this," he gestured at the ranch, the family, the life they'd built, "would exist. But you did walk in, and here we are." "Here we are," he echoed. One of their grandchildren, a little girl named Emma after Silas's lost sister, ran up to the porch. "Grandpa, tell us the story about how you and Grandma met." "You've heard it 100 times," Silas said, but he was smiling. "But I like it. Tell it again." So Silas told the story, the way he always did, about a young woman fighting to save her father's ranch, about armed men in a general store, About 5 words that changed everything. He told it simply, without embellishment, and the children listened with the rapt attention they always gave this particular tale. When he finished, Emma asked the question she always asked. "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Silas said honestly. "But sometimes being scared is when you find out who you really are. You can run away, or you can stand your ground. Your grandmother taught me that." "I didn't teach you anything," Evelyn protested. "You already knew how to fight." "I knew how to fight, yeah. But you taught me what was worth fighting for." He took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 40 years. Big difference. As the sun set and dinner was called, the family gathered around the table. 3 generations breaking bread together, telling stories, arguing good-naturedly, living the kind of ordinary, beautiful life that only seemed possible because of the extraordinary things that had come before. Later, after the children were in bed and the house had quieted, Silas and Evelyn walked out to the spot where the old barn had burned. A new barn stood there now, bigger and better, but sometimes Silas still saw the flames. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this life? Choosing me?" "Not once." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "You saved me, Silas. Not just from Granger's men, but from giving up, from accepting that the world was cruel and there was nothing I could do about it. I think you saved me too, gave me a reason to stop running, showed me that there was more to life than revenge." They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead, the same stars they'd watched the night after their wedding, the night their children were born, countless nights in between. The constellations hadn't changed, but everything else had. "You know what I think?" Evelyn said. "I think pain can destroy you, or it can forge you into something stronger. We both had every reason to become bitter, angry people, but we chose different. We chose to build instead of destroy." "Wasn't always easy?" "No, but the important things never are." Silas pulled her close, and in that moment, surrounded by the ranch they'd built, and the family they'd raised, and the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve, he felt something he'd never expected to feel again after that night his family died. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was fleeting and circumstantial, but contentment, the deep satisfaction of a life well lived, of promises kept and duties fulfilled, of choosing love over hate, construction over destruction, hope over despair. "If I could go back," he said quietly, to that scared 14-year-old kid watching his home burn, "if I could tell him one thing, it would be this. The pain doesn't disappear, but it doesn't have to win. You can build something good from the ashes. You can honor the dead by living fully, not by drowning in revenge." Would he have listened? Probably not. Some lessons you have to learn the hard way. Silas smiled. "But I'd try anyway." They walked back to the house, hand in hand, moving slower than they once had, but no less certain. Inside, their son was reading to his children before bed. Through the window, they could hear his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story, and the occasional interruption from one of the kids asking questions. "That's our legacy," Evelyn said. "Not the ranch, not the land, not even the story of how we defeated Granger. It's them. Thomas and Sarah and their children, people who grew up knowing they were loved and protected, who learned that courage means standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything." "You think we did okay? As parents?" "I think we did the best we could with what we had, and they turned out pretty damn good, so yeah, we did okay." They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room where Evelyn had slept the night Silas arrived, though they'd expanded it over the years. The house had grown with them, adapted to their needs, become a true home instead of just a shelter. As Silas settled into bed, his old body grateful for rest after a long day, he reached for the drawer of his nightstand. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was his mother's wedding ring. He kept it there as a reminder, not of vengeance or loss, but of what he'd survived, of the family he'd lost and the family he'd found. "You okay?" Evelyn asked, watching him. "Yeah, just thinking about everything that had to happen for us to get here. All the pain, all the violence, all the close calls. One wrong move and none of this exists." "But we didn't make the wrong move. We made the right ones, even when they were hard. Especially when they were hard." She turned out the lamp, and darkness filled the room. "That's all anyone can do. Make the best choices they can and hope it's enough." In the darkness, Silas found her hand and held it tight. "She's leaving here with me." he said quietly, echoing those 5 words from 40 years ago, the words that had changed both their lives. She did, Evelyn replied, her voice warm with memory and love. And I never regretted it for a second. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful in spite of it. 2 people who proved that the past didn't have to define the future, that redemption was possible, that love could outlast hate. Outside, the windmill turned in the night breeze, the creek sang over stones smoothed by decades of flowing water, and the land that had nearly been lost to greed and violence thrived under the care of people who understood its value. The ranch would continue long after Silas and Evelyn were gone, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But that first chapter, the one written in gunfire and desperation, in courage and defiance, in a general store where a stranger stepped through the door and spoke 5 words that became legend, that chapter would never be forgotten. Because some stories are too important to lose. Some examples of bravery need to be remembered and retold, not to glorify violence, but to remind people that standing up to evil is always worth it, that one person's courage can change everything, that the world bends toward justice, but only when good people refuse to bend toward fear. Silas and Evelyn Kane lived long lives, full of work and love and the simple satisfaction of building something that mattered. They died within 6 months of each other, the way couples who've been together for decades often do, and were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their children spoke at the funeral. Thomas talked about his father's patience, his quiet strength, his determination to be better than his worst moments. Sarah spoke about her mother's courage, her refusal to accept that women had limitations, her insistence that fear was never a good enough reason not to try. The whole town came to pay respects. Not just Black Hollow, but people from 3 territories who'd heard the story, who'd been inspired by it, who wanted to thank the couple who'd stood up when no one else would. On their shared headstone, Thomas had insisted on a simple inscription: Silas Kane and Evelyn Crow. Kane, they fought for what mattered. And beneath that, 5 words that summed up everything: she left here with me. The story of Silas and Evelyn became the kind of tale people told their children, then grandchildren, then great-grandchildren. The details shifted over time, as stories do, but the core remained the same: a story about courage in the face of overwhelming odds, about choosing to fight instead of flee, about 2 broken people who found each other and built something strong enough to survive for generations. The ranch still operates today, run by their descendants who carry the Kane name with pride. The general store where it all began is a museum now, with a plaque marking the spot where Silas stood and spoke those 5 words. Black Hollow thrives, a testament to what a community can accomplish when it refuses to let fear win. But more than the physical legacy, more than the land or the buildings or the historical markers, what Silas and Evelyn left behind was proof of something essential: that people can change, that love is stronger than hate, that the future doesn't have to look like the past. They proved that revenge might feel satisfying, but building something good is what actually heals. That violence might solve problems in the short term, but creating peace solves them forever. That the scars we carry don't have to define us if we refuse to let them. In the end, their story wasn't about the gunfight or the trial, or even the final victory over Granger. It was about what came after, about choosing every single day to be better than they had to be, to love harder than they were hurt, to build more than was destroyed. That's the legacy that mattered. That's the story worth telling. And somewhere in the desert night, in the sound of wind through grass and water over stone, in the laughter of children and the steady turn of a windmill, you can still hear the echo of 5 words that changed everything. She's leaving here with me. And she did. Together they built a life stronger than fear, stronger than hatred, and strong enough to survive for generations. That's all anyone can hope for. To leave the world a little better than they found it. To love fiercely and fight for what matters. To prove that even in the darkest moments, courage and compassion can light the way forward. Silas and Evelyn Kane did that, and their story reminds us that we can too.